It's tournament day. The stakes are high, you feel your heart begin to race, your hands get a little bit sweaty, and maybe you forget the lines of play that you've been practicing over and over again for the past couple of weeks. These are tournament nerves, the silent opponent that can sabotage us even before round one has begun. It can happen to the best of us. What if I told you we don't have to just manage these nerves, but actually use the energy to our advantage? Welcome back to TCG Psychology. This week we'll be looking at tournament nerves and how to manage them effectively. Welcome back to TCG Psychology, the channel where we turn psychological insights into competitive advantages. Now this week we'll be covering tournament nerves, and to start with I wanted to discuss, what are nerves and why do they happen? Now, nerves are a response to particular stresses within our environment, so thinking about when it comes to a tournament, for instance, we may be travelling to an unfamiliar tournament site, we might not know that local environment very well, we may or may not be travelling with friends and family. If we're not, then that's going to add extra stress to us. If there's large prizes at stake, there's going to be a challenge there for us to overcome, so we might get a little bit nervous in those situations. Nerves are that response and that natural response to being in an unfamiliar environment. Now, as humans, we like to problem solve and utilise our memory to look back at how we've overcome challenges like that before. If we haven't had a lot of experiences in those environments, then we're going to have limited previous memories to work off of when we're problem solving, and when we experience those situations, that's where we might experience more nerves because we're unable to problem solve as effectively. So even if you're familiar with a tournament environment, when you start to get later on in the rounds, maybe your opponent is playing certain lines as well that you're not familiar with, we may start to get nervous in those situations because we might not necessarily have the answers immediately in response to what's unfolding in front of us. So nerves can happen before we even start playing if it's to do with the actual tournament itself, but it can also impact us when we're in the middle of a round. Maybe we're used to winning 2-0 in our local play, we've come to a tournament and suddenly we've lost the first round. Again, that's an example of where we might not be familiar with that situation, so nerves might impact us. Nerves also occur when there's an impact to our ego, when we place importance in something. So for example, if we're going to a tournament, that's a threat to our ego and we might not necessarily want to be in that situation. I promise I'm okay with losing, but it's just when I come up against that double aggression Mace Windu deck that I'm suddenly in a losing position, I'm unfamiliar with it, and that may be difficult for me to deal with. But in all seriousness, nerves just mean that we're placing some importance in the event. We're there to be successful, we desire to be in a winning position in those tournaments, and that's okay. Like I mentioned previously, part of my enjoyment of TCGs is to turn up and be competitive, and part of that is wanting to win as well. So it's okay to want to win, but also we need to understand that how nerves can impact on us when we're in those positions and need to get that win through. We can experience nerves both physically and psychologically, and it's really important that we're able to identify and spot when we're experiencing these nerves because they're going to impact on our performance if we're not able to address them in time. Now, nerves are a natural part of competition, and ultimately it just means that it's a sign that you care. So being able to identify and address these nerves will enable you to perform to higher levels when it comes to those situations where you perceive more of a threat to your ego. Before we talk about strategies for managing your nerves, it's important for us to recognise that we all have our own unique experiences of tournament situations, and we're going to experience nerves in our own unique ways as well. So we might experience more physical symptoms, or we could experience more mental symptoms, or even a combination of both. So I want you to spend a few minutes to reflect on how you experience nerves before or during a tournament. But some of the physical symptoms might include increase in heart rate, shaky hands, butterflies in the stomach, dry mouth, shallow breathing. These are just some examples of how you might experience those physical symptoms. Or you might experience mental symptoms such as brain fog. We might miss key information on the board state. We might start to question our decisions. We may even experience some doubt in our TCG ability. So these are some examples of mental symptoms that you might experience. You may notice changes in behaviour such as rush plays, excessive shuffling, fidgeting, or even avoiding eye contact. Now, when we experience these tournament nerves, it can impact on our physical behaviours. So being able to recognise those symptoms early will enable us to stay in the moment and perform to our best even when we're in those situations where our ego might be at risk. So we're going to split this part of the video into two parts. The first part of the video is going to focus on pre-tournament nerves, and in this section we're going to focus on when you're travelling to the tournament, or when you arrive at the tournament venue, or just before round one begins and we start to see these nerves come up. We're going to talk about strategies on how to address those nerves. And then the second part of the video is going to focus more on in the actual gameplay moments when nerves might appear. So maybe you're going into round 3 of a game, maybe it's the last action phase and you need to get the correct lines of play to win that round. We'll look at strategies that you can use in the moment to deal with nerves as they come up in those situations as well. Now, the first strategy that we're going to look at is music, and music can be a really effective tool for handling both physical and psychological symptoms of nerves, and having a dedicated tournament playlist can really help you in those situations where you start to feel those nerves come up. Now, when it comes to my own performances, I personally prefer to be at a lower level of energy to make sure that I'm relaxed and ready to perform. Other people might perform to their best when they're at higher levels of energy, so your playlist should reflect your preferred level of energy. Now, my playlist will have slower tempo songs to ensure that my heart rate and my physical symptoms are coming down, but also it enables my psychological symptoms to slow down as well. When I'm focused on that slow music, it's addressing those rushing thoughts that are going through my head and enabling me to think clearer prior to round 1 starting. The strategy that you can use is practicing a strategy called reframing. Now, this is where we can write out a list of how we might experience nerves both mentally and physically, and identify how we can reframe them to be more beneficial for our performance. Now, this comes from a place of viewing things as a challenge or a threat. Now, if we go into that tournament and view it as a threat, we're probably going to experience more nerves as a result of that, and those nerves may impact on our ability to perform in those moments. If we're able to reframe these experiences and view the tournament as a challenge, then we can see it as something to overcome and work towards winning in those situations. So, for example, with mental symptoms, we might sit down at that tournament and see that there's a lot of control decks being played in the meta right now. And if you've seen any of my previous videos, maybe I don't have a great opinion of control decks. So when I sit down, maybe I reframe that into thinking, I've got an opportunity to overcome a control deck here, or I've got an opportunity to learn what lines of play might come up in this tournament from this first game. And when I start to think about it that way, then I'm seeing it as more of a challenge rather than a threat to my round 1 experience. And again, you can utilize this in between rounds as well. If you've noticed that at the high tables, there's a lot of control decks being played there, then again you can utilize this in a similar manner. Now, I'm not just calling out control decks here. This could be any decks that you might think that way. Maybe it's mid-range, maybe it's aggro, but what thoughts you generally experience when you're going up against those sorts of decks. Also, we can reframe the physical symptoms to allow us to view it as a challenge as well. So maybe it's that the butterflies in our stomachs or the shaky hands. In those situations, we might be able to reframe them to think, well, actually, I'm energized, I'm ready to go today, and this is a sign that I'm ready to perform. So again, we're reframing those experiences to work in our favor. And again, you can utilize these in between rounds or before competitions as well. So in between rounds, if you've just come from a high energy game, it was really close, I've won it, but you've just come out on top, then that's a situation where you might be able to reframe that energy into, yes, I'm ready to go for the next game as well. So have a think about how you might be able to reframe your mental and your physical symptoms. So again, I suggest writing out a list of both and how you might be able to reframe some of those common experiences that you have. So one technique that you can use within performance is known as refocusing. So you might notice when your nerves start to increase within your gameplay that we're unable to adequately address what's happening on the board state because our attention is being dragged from what's going to happen in the future, maybe what happened in the past, but our mind isn't in the present moment because our thoughts are just all over the place. So in these situations, it's really useful to have a small phrase or something that will help you come back into the moment to perform when that starts to happen. And I like to use the phrase WIN, which stands for what's important now. Now, when it comes to TCGs, we've got so many decisions to make within short time frames, And that, especially when our nerves come up, that can start to feel like a very difficult thing to navigate. So by saying to myself, win, I'm reminding myself, well, what's actually important now? What is happening on this board state that I need to address immediately? And how can I prioritize my initial actions based on that information? So having a short phrase that you can utilize in those situations can be a really useful technique to deal with that anxiety that's happening in that situation and bring our attention back to the board state. Dealing with tournament nerves is a skill and takes practice, so take some time to figure out what skills work for you and how you're going to practice them before utilizing them in competitive environments. Share any tips and tricks you have with the community on how to deal with tournament nerves in the comment section below. Make sure that you're subscribed to the TCG Psychology channel and turn on that notification bell so that you see when future videos are uploaded. If you know someone that could utilize some tips and tricks on how to deal with tournament nerves, feel free to share this video with them. And as always, go ahead and win that mind game meta.